And joining us with his perspective on the election is Douglas Yates. He is a professor at the American Graduate School in Paris. Thank you very much for your time there. Now, projections suggest, of course, Macron will be victorious, but it was a narrow win, so to speak. It's one of the lowest participation rates in decades as well. What does this say about Macron's success, do you think?
Well, the two-round presidential ballot constructs an artificial majority. Thank goodness for that. There's a great deal of relief in France tonight, because if Marine Le Pen had been elected president, we would be looking at something like a Trump presidency or Boris Johnson. And so although this was a narrow victory, it wasn't as narrow as it could have been. There was a lot of concern that Mélenchon voters might, because they're anti-system, vote Le Pen in greater numbers. They didn't. In fact, what happened was, for the most part, they appeared to have abstained. And although that didn't hurt Le Pen's turnout, because she had 42%, it didn't help that much either. What we've got is a storm on the horizon. In 5 years' time, Marine Le Pen and the Rassemblement National might come to power. In 2017, it was about 2/3 of the people who managed to muster an anti-Le Pen vote. This year, 58%. 5 years' time, if the trend continues, the extreme right could come to power. And that's what we're looking at with this 5-year pass of sanity.
Now, it's a milestone in a country, though, where presidents struggle to secure a second term. Why do French presidents rarely get re-elected?
Well, over the last few years, there have been institutional leadership struggles in the two main parties, that is the Gaullist right and the center socialist left. And these betrayals, first Sarkozy betraying Chirac's Dauphin, Alain Juppé, then Ségolène Royal betraying François Hollande, and then Hamon and the socialists betraying Hollande, and then Macron betraying Hollande, has resulted in a collapse of the traditional institutional parties. And the first to suffer from that were the presidents. But we've seen also a decomposition in the legislative elections as well, and that's what we're looking at now. Macron's party, the République En Marche, are in power because Macron became president. Without him, they would simply have ceased to exist. Now he's been re-elected. The question is, can he institutionalize this victory? If he can't, he might have won the presidency. But if the National Front, if the Rassemblement National form a national union, as Eric Zemmour has called for, then Macron's victory will be a Pyrrhic victory, and he'll find himself in cohabitation, which is the Achilles heel of the French Fifth Republic.
Now, as you mentioned, Le Pen went from an outlier a decade ago to being definitely within the zone of potential to win this presidency. But given she still sees this as a success in one way or another, she sort of says that Macron may have won the battle, but he hasn't won the war. What does she mean by this? Are you talking about the 5 years' time that more French voters will lean further to the right?
Yeah, so there's two things. One is in the upcoming legislative, she's going to present herself as the main opposition candidate. With the traditional right collapsing, and Macron occupying a sort of a center that moves to the left, she might be the only candidate on the right. And the second is a culture war that's occurring. Issues like Europe, anti-immigration stands, xenophobia, fears of Islamic terrorism, and a general malaise of the poor who don't feel any party represents them, gives her the opportunity to position herself as the driving force of government and policymaking. If she succeeds her bet in the legislative elections, Macron could find himself unable to pursue any of his neoliberal agenda, and she would be in control of the parliament and of the government. That's what she's talking about in the proximate view, and that's the next danger for the upcoming elections in early summer.
I understand that Le Pen certainly drew upon the cost of living to try and get voters on her side, but the French economy looks to be performing well compared to the world's other major economies, but of course it's also highly integrated in the EU. How much did economic factors impact the way people voted today?
Yeah, so I believe in Alec Lichtman's approach that presidential votes, are retrospective votes. And President Macron was the president of COVID. So everyone understood that he was presiding over a crisis. And I think in the end, although no one's really happy with his results, they feel he did okay. Unemployment is record low. He's pushing to have 0% unemployment. It's unheard of. Inflation is high, but people understand the Ukraine crisis and America's priming of the pump are the principal causes for that. Inflation is not really the cause of the government. And when you look at things like growth after COVID, there has been a rebound in the European economy. So growth is actually positive for the first time in several years in France. So globally speaking, Macron has presided over, well, the best of all possible scenarios.
All right, Douglas Yates, thank you very much for your time. American Graduate School in Paris.